The next call is a split call. Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, I think I'd start my point by noting the fact that the government decided to put up Todd McClay on intelligence legislation. A contradiction in terms to start with, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I think most people are aware of the fact, although some of the new members mightn't be, I've had a mixed history in this House to do with security legislation. Mr Speaker, I was arrested in the House opposing the 1977 legislation, and the core reason that I was opposing it and many New Zealanders marched on this Parliament was because we did not think the Prime Minister of the day deserved the trust which was being given to him as part of that legislation. And, Mr Speaker, I think we've come full circle. I certainly trusted Jim Bolger with the legislation. I think there's Jenny Shipley I didn't know well enough to know how she acted in this area. Helen Clark and David Longy certainly took this legislation very seriously across security areas. But, Mr Speaker, times have changed. I have no doubt that we need changes in our security legislation, not only to do with this agency, but to do with the SIS. In fact, I've been part of consultations on changes to the SIS legislation. And it just seems to me, Mr Speaker, unbelievable that the Prime Minister is trying to do a patch job on this bit of the legislation without having a proper look across all of the agencies as to what needs to happen. I'd say something else, Mr Speaker. There are considerable infringements of personal liberties which flow from this legislation. Considerable. And what this Parliament does when it is doing its work well is it comes together and works out what is fair and what is reasonable. Now, and I'm just going to say this a little bit carefully to the people who I hope will be supporting a Labor government later on. We don't always get everyone on board, but I think it is important for legislation to be seen to be reasonable, for it to be at least bipartisan. I think that is a minimum for this sort of legislation which infringes so badly on the liberties of individuals. I think something else is important, Mr Speaker, and that is oversight. And I want to say that there's two levels of oversight that I'm worried about here. There's oversight of the legislation, and we'll get back to that later on as to which committee it's going to go to and for what period. But also the question of the oversight of the agency itself. Mr Speaker, I think we should soon be at a point where we can have someone who we trust to oversee it, someone who cares about the governance, someone who gets regular briefings on matters that are important, someone who doesn't appoint his boyhood friends as the director and doesn't suggest to them that they should apply for the job. We want, Mr Speaker, to have a group in charge of this who are going to haul the director over the coals. It is important, Mr Speaker, when so many rights are being taken away, that the individuals who are making those decisions are properly accountable. And this legislation doesn't get there anywhere near that at all. That is why, Mr Speaker, in my opinion, there needs to be a proper review, a proper inquiry. I would suggest that it would be a good idea to involve people from offshore as well as New Zealand. Australia have done it twice in recent memory, to have a really good look at our mosaic of security arrangements, because, I do agree with the Prime Minister, they're out of date. The legislation's out of date. I think the pattern of arrangements is out of date. The fact that it appears that our information is sent almost automatically to the United States from this organisation is out of date It's got to change, Mr Speaker, and this doesn't do it.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. I call Stephen Browning.
Mr Speaker, I rise to speak to the Government Communications Security Bureau and related legislation amendment bill. The question